The winds rise not only in the deserts of time but in the chambers of the soul, where echoes of ancient voices call out to those with ears to hear. Beneath the crust of conventional history lies a pulse, slow, deliberate, eternal, a current of hidden wisdom flowing through the veins of forgotten civilizations. Before the birth of what we now call science, before the creeds of organized faith, there were the keepers, the fire watchers, the alchemists. They were not called so in the beginning. Their names are lost in clay tablets ground to dust in temples, swallowed by the jungle, in chants no longer uttered. But across the earth, from the Nile's sacred banks to the Indus Valley's star-lined sanctuaries, from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the Andean heights where stones speak, fragments of their knowing remain, always hidden, always encoded. Their teachings were not for the masses, but for the initiate, the one willing to die to the profane world and be reborn through mystery. To understand the alchemists, one must abandon the modern caricature. Old men bent over boiling flasks, seeking to transmute lead into gold. That image is but a veil, a riddle cast to conceal the true quest, for the stone was never merely a material thing, it was a cipher, a key, a mirror. The real transmutation was inward, of the base soul into its divine form. To turn lead into gold was to awaken the buried light of the cosmos hidden in man's being. But how did this path begin? Where does this strange wisdom originate? The earliest signs lie deep beneath the sands of ancient Kem, Egypt, land of black soil and luminous gods. The priests of Thoth, god of hidden knowledge, were said to guard the sacred scrolls of pre-Diluvian wisdom, passed down from a time before the Great Flood, from the age of Zepi Tepi. The first time, in the dim sanctuaries of the mystery temples, initiates passed through 9 gates of death and rebirth, learning the divine language of hieroglyphs, not mere script, but magical sigils encoding the vibrations of reality. There, in the womb of the temple, they spoke not of matter, but of essence. They did not burn incense for ritual's sake, but to harmonize the body with the unseen. Symbols were not decorations, but formulas, living geometries echoing the structure of the universe. And at the heart of it all was transformation, the notion that all is in flux, that through inner work and sacred knowledge, one could ascend from the fragmented self into wholeness. From Egypt the current flowed to Greece, shrouded in Orphic hymns and Pythagorean mysteries. Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes, appeared as the alchemical voice of a tradition far older than the Hellenic world. In the Corpus Hermeticum, the emerald tablet whispered its ciphered promise. As above, so below, as within, so without. This axiom was no metaphor. It was a commandment, a law inscribed into the fabric of reality. The stone, said to be the goal of all alchemical striving, was never a simple artifact. It was a paradox, both material and immaterial, both key and door. The alchemists spoke of it in riddles. The stone that is not a stone, the child of the sun and moon, the red king and the white queen joined in divine marriage. Only those who passed through the furnace of the self, who dissolved and coagulated their inner nature, could hope to find it, and so the journey began not in laboratories, but in caves and catacombs, temples and tombs. The philosophers. Stone was not found in the world. It was made through suffering, purification, and revelation. The great work was never a mere process. It was a path, an ordeal, a sacred fire. But before the seeker can enter the fire, they must know the nature of the world. They walk in a world shaped not by coincidence, but by design. The ancient architects did not build randomly. Their temples, tombs, and talismans form a map, one that points, not to geography, but to inner space. As the sands shift and veil the truth, a question rises like incense in the midnight sanctuary. Who first shaped the knowledge of the stone? And why was it hidden, sealed behind riddles, scattered through symbols and coded in myth? In the next step of our journey, we shall descend into the heart of the mystery, to meet the hidden lineage of alchemists, their guardianship of forbidden texts, and the secret orders that preserved the flame through centuries of suppression. In the shadowed corridors of time, beyond the flickering torchlight of accepted history, a chain of transmission winds like a serpent coiled, luminous, and alive. It is the lineage of the keepers, the silent guardians of the prima materia, the first matter, the divine substance said to be the womb of all creation. These were not merely scholars or philosophers, they were initiates of a sacred science, custodians of a flame too potent, too transformative, to be entrusted to the unprepared soul. The suppression of their teachings was not accidental. Every empire, every orthodoxy that sought control feared the alchemist, not because of gold, but because of freedom, for the stone granted not wealth, but sovereignty of the spirit. And in a world where thought was to be regulated, where the heavens were claimed by priesthoods and kings, the true alchemist was a heretic, a rebel soul walking between worlds. After the decline of Egypt, when the golden statues were defaced and the temples turned to ruin, the torch passed eastward and westward, concealed within new forms. In Alexandria, that ancient beacon of knowledge, a convergence occurred. Pagan, Jew, Gnostic, and Hermetic alike gathered under the banner of divine knowing. Here, under the watch of the Serapeum and the vast library now long turned to ash, the sacred sciences of Chaldea, Egypt, and India were distilled, translated, and hidden once again behind symbols. But Alexandria was not to stand. Fire and dogma soon swept through its streets, and the secrets scattered like embers in the wind, yet fire cannot unwrite memory. In Persia, the Magi preserved fragments of the Hermetic code within Zoroastrian allegory. In India, echoes of the stone are found in the Soma rites and the teachings of inner transmutation within the Tantras and Yogic texts. In China, Taoist alchemists spoke of the elixir of immortality, not as a potion, but a harmonizing of breath, spirit, and internal energy. Jing Qi and Shen, mirroring the alchemist's tria prima, sulfur, mercury, and salt. The lineage moved as spirit does, through disguise, through adaptation. It survived because it did not resist suppression openly. It hid in plain sight. In the early centuries of the Common Era, as Rome tightened its grip and the Church emerged as arbiter of sacred truth, the current passed. Again, this time to underground chambers in Europe, where strange brotherhoods began to form. Among them, the most elusive were the Hermetic circles and Gnostic enclaves who claimed descent from the Egyptian mysteries and Alexandrian initiates. These were not just secret gatherings. They were schools of transformation, from the Cathars of southern France, whose rituals of consolamentum mirrored spiritual alchemy, to the mysterious order of the Rosy Cross, the Rosicrucians. Whispers of the stone endured. The Rosicrucian manifestos of the early 17th century, cloaked in allegory, spoke of a reformation not of religion, but of the world itself, led by one who had mastered the secrets of nature. Father C.R., the mythical Christian Rosenkreuz, whether real or symbolic, his journey to the East, his study of hidden knowledge, and his return with the power to heal all illnesses was no less than a coded description of the alchemist's path to Allah. KNING. And always, the pattern remains. Sacred knowledge hidden within myth, truth embedded in story. The Templars, accused of worshipping a severed head and speaking secret words beneath the earth, were not mere knights. Many believed they were protectors of an ancient current, inheritors of sacred geometry, guardians of relics not just of flesh, but of light. After their fall, their knowledge too went underground into Freemasonic lodges, into coded art and architecture, into the veiled teachings of the Kabbalists. The Hebrew Kabbalah, often misread as a mystical footnote to Judaism, carries within it the architecture of the universe in 10 emanations, the Sephirot, and a path of ascent for the human soul through darkness and veils, back to divine unity. This path, from Molkath to Kether, is another map of the magnum opus, the great work. Whether it bore the name of Shekinah, Sophia, or Isis, the divine feminine was always present, the hidden force of transformation, the Black Madonna of the Alchemists' prima materia, she who waits in darkness, awaiting union with the perfected masculine, the Red King in the sacred wedding of opposites. And so the keepers kept watch, through war, inquisition, and the slow erosion of memory. They encoded their knowledge into symbols, manuscripts, and stone. The Gothic cathedrals, Notre Dame, Chartres, Amiens, were not just places of worship, but alchemical texts written in glass and sculpture, shaped by hands who knew the sacred code. To the uninitiated, they are beautiful relics. To the adept, they are instruction. But what then is the process of the great work? What does it truly mean to transmute the soul? The language of allegory has hidden it well. But in the crucible of the next part, we shall begin to decipher the stages: calcination, dissolution, conjunction, the alchemical rites that mirror the soul's own death and rebirth. To walk the path of the alchemist is not to stroll through gardens of enlightenment, but to pass through flames that do not burn the flesh, but purify the soul. This journey, encoded in cryptic Latin stages and often masked in elemental metaphors, is not a chemical recipe. It is a roadmap of inner transformation, and like all true initiatory paths, it begins with destruction. The great work, or magnum opus, unfolds in stages. These stages, 7 or 12, depending on the tradition, are not fixed, linear steps, but archetypal movements, rhythms within the soul's spiral toward awakening. Let us now step into the first gate, calcination, the fire. The process begins with burning. The ego, the false identity clung to by the profane self, must be reduced to ash. In the ancient laboratories of the soul, this was symbolized by the black phase, nigredo. It was the stage of chaos, despair, spiritual death, and yet this darkness was sacred, for only what is impure burns. Only what is false resists the fire. In myth, this stage appears as the descent into the underworld, the trials of Inanna, the dismemberment of Osiris, the wilderness of Christ. To pass through calcination is to face the shadow, to stare into the mirror and see what the persona has hidden. It is not the destruction of the self, but of the mask. Then comes dissolution, the water. After the ego is burned, its ashes are cast into the waters of the unconscious. This is the stage where certainty dissolves, where the foundations of belief are broken apart. In ancient terms, this was the ocean of none, the primordial chaos. The initiate is now a wanderer, adrift, broken open. Here lies danger. Many go mad. Many mistake the ocean for the goal, but this is not the end. It is only the second baptism. From the depths of dissolution emerges separation. The air. Now begins the discerning. The alchemist separates the pure from the impure, the essential from the illusory. This is the razor's edge of thought, the sword of clarity. In Kabbalistic terms, it is the movement from Yesod to Tiprith, from foundation to beauty, or return to center. Here, sacred discrimination is learned. The soul, now hollowed out, begins to hear again, not the voices of the world, but the whisper of its own divine seed. And then, conjunction, the earth, the sacred marriage, the union of opposites. The Red King and the White Queen. This stage is both symbolic and experiential, the merging of masculine and feminine within, of active and receptive, of will and surrender. In the alchemical vessel, the vas hermeticum, a new being begins to gestate, a third force, neither ego nor spirit, but the soul reborn, begins to form. The stone is not yet born, but its outline is visible in the ether. But the work is not complete. Conjunction only initiates a second cycle. What follows is fermentation, the resurrection. Just as wine ferments into something greater than grape and skin, so too does the soul, now united, begin to rise. A spark from above descends, the nous, the divine mind, the dove in Christian allegory, the phoenix in Egyptian thought. The fermenting soul receives illumination, visions, gnosis. But this too is a trial. For false light mimics true. Discernment is needed more than ever. Then comes distillation, refinement. Now the fire returns, not as destruction, but as purification. The insights, the revelations, the ecstatic experiences, all must be tested. The alchemist must extract the essence, distilling all visions into wisdom. This is the mountain path, the ascent through air so thin it pierces the lungs. In the sacred texts of the Sufis, this is the thinning of the veil, the place where language dies, and only silence remains. And finally, coagulation. The stone, from base matter rises the perfected self. No longer a seeker, the alchemist becomes the stone itself, the living bridge between heaven and earth. Gold is not metal. It is the radiance of being that shines from one who has remembered their true nature. The stone heals because it vibrates in harmony with the divine. It transforms because it is that which sees no separation. And yet, even in coagulation, there is mystery, for the great work is not a one-time act, but a spiral. Each completion is but the beginning of a deeper cycle. Just as the Ouroboros devours its own tail, the alchemist returns, each time more refined, more luminous, more whole. These stages were never meant to be dogma. They are archetypes, reflections of deep psychic processes encoded into the myths of all peoples. Whether in the labors of Hercules, the path of the Bodhisattva, or the tales of the Grail, we find echoes of the work, always hidden, always awaiting the seeker who dares to enter the fire. But where was this knowledge preserved when empires fell, when inquisitions raged, when libraries burned? In the next passage of our journey, we shall follow the trail of the forbidden texts, grimoires, manuscripts, and alchemical codices, where the great work was encoded in ink, glyph, and cipher, preserved by those who knew that knowledge cannot be destroyed, only hidden. There are books that breathe, not with lungs, but with memory. Their pages rustle like the whispers of spirits, and their ink glows faintly under the eyes of those whose soul still remembers the forgotten language. These are not the books of libraries, but of vaults, hidden behind false walls, buried in monastery crypts, tucked within the bindings of innocent volumes. They survive. They are the forbidden texts, carriers of the alchemist's code, guardians of the stone's secret. When truth is deemed dangerous, it must disguise itself, and so the keepers of the work, persecuted, hunted, exiled, poured their gnosis into cryptic forms, not to deceive, but to protect. The unprepared would see only absurd symbols, grotesque beasts, or recipes for fantastical potions. But the initiate, armed with inner keys, would recognize the roadmap of soul transmutation encoded in metaphor, sigil, and GOIPH. One of the most enigmatic of these volumes is the Emerald Tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the mythical fusion of the Egyptian Thoth and the Greek Hermes. Though brief, its verses have echoed through centuries like a mantra of divine mechanics. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below. To accomplish the miracles of the one thing, this was no poetic flourish. It was an equation, a metaphysical formula describing the resonance between the microcosm and the macrocosm, the human and the divine, the body and the cosmos. It is said that the tablet was found in a hidden chamber beneath the Great Pyramid, inscribed in green fire. Whether legend or symbol, the story itself is a cipher, but the Emerald Tablet is merely the prologue. Throughout the medieval and Renaissance periods, alchemical texts proliferated, some genuine transmissions, others distorted echoes. Manuscripts, such as the Mutus Liber, the Silent Book, conveyed the entire process of the work in a series of symbol-laden illustrations, devoid of any words. The silence was intentional. Words can be censored, images pass like dreams. In its pages, a naked alchemist and his female counterpart perform rituals under the stars, gather dew, observe planetary alignments, all metaphors for inner processes, the gathering of subtle energies, the union of soul aspects, the invocation of cosmic rhythms. Then there is the Ripley Scroll, a colossal illuminated manuscript that spans nearly 20 feet when unrolled. Named after George Ripley, a 15th century English alchemist, it is not a scroll for study, but for contemplation. Dragons devour kings, birds emerge from sealed vessels, serpents coil around chalices. It is not madness, it is the symbolic grammar of a lost language, speaking to the archetypal layers of the initiate's unconscious. Still more elusive is the Voynich manuscript, written in an unknown script, illustrated with bizarre botanical drawings, zodiacal wheels, and naked women immersed in alchemical baths. Though modern minds obsess over deciphering its code, they often miss the essential truth. It may not be meant to be decoded by intellect at all. It may be a mirror, reflecting the consciousness of the reader, revealing only what they are ready to see. These manuscripts were not books in the ordinary sense. They were initiatic devices, talismans of transformation. To read them was to open a portal. Their authors, often anonymous or writing under mystical pseudonyms, did not write to teach. They wrote to awaken, and surrounding these works always were the secret societies, the Rosicrucians, whose manifestos wove together alchemical, Christian, and Hermetic thought, and coded their entire worldview into the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, an allegorical tale of initiation filled with strange rituals and alchemical metaphors. The wedding itself, 7 days in length, echoes the 7 stages of the work. It is not a story to be read once, but again and again, each time yielding new insight as layers of meaning unfold. The Freemasons, though more veiled, inherited much of this symbolic lineage. The tracing boards, the rituals of building and light, the ascent through degrees, all mirror the structure of the great work. Even the tools, compass, square, plumb line, become symbols of internal alignment, not mere architecture. In the East, texts such as the Tantras and the I Ching speak in similar riddles. The I Ching, or Book of Changes, maps not only fate, but transformation. Each hexagram is a state of being, a phase in the cycle of dissolution and rebirth. The Tantras, long misunderstood as erotic manuals, are in fact precise alchemical treatises on the transmutation of desire into higher consciousness. Even Christian mysticism hid the work in plain sight. The visions of Hildegard von Bingen, the dark night of St. John of the Cross, the luminous resurrection in Meister Eckhart, all can be read as descriptions of the soul's refinement through sacred fire. But these sacred writings were always under threat. The Inquisition, the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the burning of heretical works, all sought to erase the record of this deeper path. Yet what is written in the Akashic fire cannot be destroyed. The truth survives not only in books, but in symbols carved into cathedral stones, in the stained glass of forgotten chapels, in the layout of ancient cities aligned to the stars. The manuscripts merely point the way, and the way leads to something deeper still, a knowledge not written, but embodied, passed through silent initiation, ritual, and the resonance of sacred sites built according to divine proportion. In our next part, we shall journey into the symbolic architecture of the ancients. Temples, cathedrals, and sacred cities constructed as alchemical vessels, where the geometry of the gods shaped stone into mystery, and where the very design of space guided the soul toward the stone. The earth has bones of stone and veins of fire, but within her lie circuits of another kind, lines of resonance, veins of power, lattices mapped not by surveyors, but by initiates. Across these hidden networks, the ancients placed their most sacred architecture, not as monuments to faith, but as vessels of transformation. These were not merely temples, They were machines of the spirit, resonant chambers built to mirror the cosmic order and to ignite the alchemical process within the soul long before the word alchemy ever passed into Latin. Its principles were known in stone. The builders of sacred spaces, from the megalithic to the medieval, understood that geometry was not an invention, but a revelation. Geometry was gnosis in form. The same divine proportions that shaped the orbits of the planets and the spirals of galaxies could be used to shape sanctuaries of transmutation on Earth. In ancient Egypt, the Great Pyramid was not a tomb. Its true name, Mer, meant place of ascension. Its internal chambers, shafts, and dimensions correspond not only to stellar alignments, but to initiation stages. From the base matter of the king's chamber to the resurrection encoded in the so-called coffer, a symbolic sarcophagus of the initiate soul's self. Within its angles and resonance, the pyramid became an alchemical crucible. Its stones hum with a frequency few can hear, and fewer still can interpret. This tradition of sacred design echoed across the world. At Teotihuacan, the city where men become gods, pyramids rose in precise relationship to celestial cycles. The Avenue of the Dead, flanked by structures devoted to the sun and moon, leads not to oblivion, but to transformation. Here, as in Egypt, the path of the dead was the path of the alchemist, a soul stripped of illusion and reborn in cosmic light. Even the humble labyrinths of ancient Crete, or the spirals etched into Celtic stones, were more than decoration. They encoded movement inward toward the still center and outward again, bearing the light. They were maps of the soul's descent into matter and its return to spirit. But the true renaissance of alchemical architecture erupted in the cathedrals of Europe, where the builders, many of whom were initiates of the hidden orders, embedded the stone's mysteries into Gothic form. At Chartres Cathedral, the labyrinth on the floor is not a game. It is a pilgrimage condensed into symbol. Pilgrims would walk it in meditation, retracing the soul's path through dissolution and reunion. Above them, stained glass windows bathed the stone in living light, each pane a coded scripture, each color a frequency, red for sulfur, blue for mercury, green for rebirth. The rose windows were not merely beautiful. They were mandalas, sacred geometries aligned with stellar and spiritual truths. The pillars, arches, and vaults of these cathedrals followed principles of divine proportion, most notably the golden ratio, phi, a number that unites art, nature, and cosmos. To enter such a space was to enter a harmonic resonance, the chamber where every dimension, every shadow, and every echo nudged the soul toward remembrance. The builders themselves, the Compagnons, the Collegia, their early Freemasons, held their own rites of passage. They saw the cathedral not only as a house of God, but as a mirror of man. The nave, the heart, the altar, the pineal flame, the towers, the pillars of duality. The initiate passed through darkness into light, ascending not only in space, but in consciousness. Outside Europe, the principle was the same. In Angkor Wat, the great mandalic structure mirrored the cosmos. In Borobudur, the 9 terraces were initiatic steps, crowned with the stupa, the void beyond form. In the Navajo Hazo, harmony with the sacred landscape was itself a form of architecture, a dwelling built in resonance with spirit. And always, geometry was the key. Sacred geometry is the language of unity. It is the alphabet of creation. The triangle, symbol of fire and aspiration. The square, matter and stability. The circle, eternity and perfection. The pentagram, the perfected human, arms and legs outstretched, soul-centered. The hexagram, the alchemical union, the seal of Solomon, the marriage of fire and water. Even the placement of sites followed hidden logic. The builders aligned structures with solstices and equinoxes, lunar phases, and star risings. Stonehenge marks the sun's rebirth. The Great Pyramid points to Orion Osiris, the resurrected god. At Machu Picchu, windows frame the rising of the Pleiades, the seed stars of many traditions. These were not accidents. They were rituals in stone. To walk these places, to feel their proportions, was to undergo a subtle alchemy. The stone, working not through words, but through space. But who were the builders who carried this knowledge through ages of darkness, who encoded the stone into architecture when scriptures were burned, and priests turned to tyrants? In the next chapter, we shall walk among them, the secret orders and hidden brotherhoods who swore oaths by moonlight, preserved the alchemical current through persecution, and passed the flame from hand to trembling hand across centuries of silence. Beneath the veils of history, behind the altars, under the cloisters, within the secret doors of forgotten cities, moved the quiet shadows of those who kept the ancient fire. They wore no crowns, commanded no armies, and yet their influence shaped empires from within. They were the silent heirs of a deeper truth, the brotherhoods of the hidden flame, guardians of the great work when the world no longer remembered the stone. These orders were not born all at once, nor were they uniform. Some emerged in the wake of catastrophe, others in anticipation of it, but all were bound by a singular oath, to preserve, through symbol and silence, the sacred science of transformation. Their roots reached back to the Egyptian priesthood, where initiates of Thoth bore the knowledge of sacred geometry, star law, and the rites of death and rebirth. When Egypt fell, many fled with their knowledge, forming secret enclaves throughout the Mediterranean. This migration gave rise to the mystery schools of Eleusis, Samothrace, and Delphi, where the gods were no longer worshipped in myth alone, but embodied in inner states of consciousness. The collapse of the classical world did not extinguish the fire, it scattered it into hidden sects, into remote libraries, into the coded language of Gnostics, Hermeticists, and Manichaeans. These spiritual dissidents, cast out by the rising orthodoxy of empire, formed an invisible chain, initiates linked not by blood or creed, but by resonance. And then came the Templars, rising under the guise of protecting pilgrims in the Holy Land. The Knights Templar quickly amassed wealth, influence, and, more dangerously, knowledge. Within the vaults of Solomon's temple, they are said to have uncovered scrolls, relics, and inscriptions containing ancient teachings predating even the Torah. Whether these were fragments of the Ark, the remnants of the Arcadian mystery, or maps of celestial alignments, we may never fully know, but their impact was profound. The Templars began constructing churches across Europe not according to papal design, but in patterns echoing sacred geometry, spirals, golden ratios, and ley lines. Many of their structures contained hidden chambers, sealed vaults, and anomalous symbols: the Baphomet, the Black Madonna, the Flower of Life, misunderstood, feared, and ultimately condemned. In 1307, on a Friday the 13th, the hammer of the church fell. The Templars were arrested en masse, tortured, burned, but the fire they carried was not extinguished, it was transferred. Some fled to Scotland, others into the Pyrenees. Some believed the Templar legacy passed into the Freemasons, whose craft guilds had long harbored esoteric wisdom under the cover of stonework. Within the Masonic temples, the blueprint of the universe was preserved not as a dogma, but as a lived architecture of initiation. Degrees mirrored the stages of the great work. The tools of the builder became the tools of the soul: compass, square, level, trowel, all symbolizing alignment, balance, rectitude, and the shaping of inner stone. The lodge was more than a fraternity. It was a vessel dotted, and while Freemasonry moved above ground, other orders remained veiled. The Rosicrucians emerged as whispers, never seen, never confirmed, but their influence unmistakable. The Fama Fraternitatis, Confessio Fraternitatis, and Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz declared the existence of a hidden brotherhood working toward the spiritual reformation of the world. They claimed no power, only presence. Their founder, if he existed at all, was said to have traveled through the East, studied with mystics and sages, and returned bearing the seed of the stone. Yet even the Rosicrucians spoke in code. Their texts, filled with allegory and sacred paradox, offered no direct answers, only invitations. Other orders flickered through history. The Martinists, with their focus on the reintegration of man into divine order, the Theosophists, who sought to unify East and West under the perennial philosophy, the Golden Dawn, whose rituals invoked archangels, planets, and elemental intelligences in the alchemical theater of the temple. Even among the alchemists themselves, networks existed, secret correspondences, coded drawings, shared manuscripts. Figures like Paracelsus, Basil Valentine, and Michael Mayer formed a hidden genealogy, speaking through symbols and ciphers, often at risk of death. Many signed their names not as authors, but as servants of the art. But not all orders served the light. Some, seduced by power, turned the work inward, not toward wholeness, but domination. They sought the stone not as a path of return, but as a weapon to control, to manipulate, to forge a counterfeit eternity. These were the dark alchemists, the black lodges, whose rites inverted the sacred process. Their symbols mimic the true but twist its essence. Their light blinds instead of reveals. This duality between false and true initiate has shadowed the history of the esoteric ever since. It is no accident. The work demands discernment. And now, in a time when secret orders have become cultural curiosities, when their symbols are found on dollar bills and in pop culture, the question arises, has the knowledge been lost, or merely hidden in plain sight? To those who seek the stone in vaults or scrolls, only shadows reveal themselves. But to those who dare turn the gaze inward, beyond the mind, beyond the flesh, a deeper truth unfolds. The temple of transmutation was never merely built in stone, but woven into the human soul. The true laboratory of the alchemist is the body, the psyche, the spirit, a triune vessel echoing the tria prima of alchemy itself: salt, sulfur, and mercury. In this inner temple, every symbol of the work finds its living counterpart. The vessels and fires of the alchemical diagrams are not inert objects. They are aspects of consciousness. The Athener, the ever-burning furnace of the great work, is the heart, not the organ alone, but the center of will, desire, and sacrifice. It is here that base passions must be tested, calcined, and made sacred. The fire must burn steadily, not to fierce, lest it destroy, not too weak, lest it fail to transform. The body is the prima materia, the raw, chaotic substance of incarnation, but it is also the map. In the Kabbalistic tree of life, this anatomy is traced with precision. 10 Sephirot emanations of the divine unfold from Kether, the crown, to Malkuth, the kingdom. These are not mere cosmological stages, they are internal states of being. Each Sephira corresponds to a layer of consciousness, a gate of energy, a phase of the work. To ascend the tree is to move from matter to spirit, but it is also to descend, for only in integrating the shadow can one complete the path. This is the alchemy of integration, where light is drawn from darkness, gold from lead. And it is in the middle pillar, the balance between severity and mercy, that the alchemist finds the true path, the narrow way of the initiate. In Eastern traditions, the subtle body is mapped through chakras, 7 primary energy centers aligned along the spine. These to mirror the stages of the work. The root, base, and red holds the unconscious. The shadow, the primal drive. It is calcination in its rawest form. As the Kundalini serpent ascends, energy is refined, passed through dissolution water, emotion, separation, air, intellect, and into conjunction heart, synthesis. The throat, the voice of truth, aligns with fermentation, the breaking of silence, the speaking of the inner word. The third eye, distillation, clarity beyond illusion, and the crown, pure white coagulation, the merging with divine source. Even the organs of the body, In Taoist inner alchemy serve as crucibles. The liver processes the soul's anger, the lungs its sorrow, the kidneys its fear. Each must be purified, each made into a vessel for spirit. But the most vital principle of the inner work is this: the union of opposites. Within every soul lies the dual, Sol and Luna, the sun and the moon, the red king and the white queen. This is not a gendered dichotomy, but a metaphysical one, active and receptive, conscious and unconscious, fire and water. The alchemist's task is to wed them, not to erase their difference, but to bring them into sacred conjunction. Carl Jung, one of the few moderns to grasp the depth of this truth, wrote that alchemy was the projection of the individuation process in symbolic form. In his Red Book and in his explorations of archetypes, he identified the self as the hidden stone, the reconciled totality of the psyche. Emerging from the crucible of suffering, conflict, and deep inner work, dreams, too, are part of the process. The ancient alchemists recorded visions not as hallucinations, but as revelations from the inner flame. The dragon devouring itself, the hermaphrodite child, the peacock's tail, all appear in the dreamscape of the soul undergoing transformation. These are not fables, but experiences, moments when the unconscious reveals its participation in the work. And then there is the voice, that silent guide that emerges not from the ego, but from beyond, the demon, the inner Hermes, the spark of divine intelligence that leads the seeker through the labyrinth. Many have tried to name it guardian angel, higher self, the holy guardian. But all such names are veils. The truth is simple. Stone is not found, it finds you when the vessel is ready. Thus, the inner work is neither quick nor painless. It is the great ordeal. It requires the death of identity, the surrender of certainty, the willingness to enter the black phase of Nigredo and remain until the light breaks through. It is a solitary path, yet never alone, for each seeker treads it in the footsteps of those who came before. And though the symbols vary, whether the tree, the chakras, the elemental gates, or the vision of the peacock angel, they all point to one truth. The philosopher's stone is the perfected self, and the great work is the soul remembering it was never broken, only veiled. But to understand the soul's journey is not enough. The next turn of the spiral leads us outward once again to the heavens, for the ancients did not separate the sky from the self. The stars were not distant fire, but living intelligences. In the next part, we shall enter the alchemical skies, exploring the astral architecture, ancient calendars, and cosmic alignments that guided the work from above. Long before the first astrolabe turned in a scholar's hand, long before constellations were mapped by ink or named by kings, the ancients looked upward, not to measure time, but to remember it. They saw in the heavens not chaos, but order, a hidden architecture mirroring the soul's journey. To the alchemists, the stars were not inert spheres. They were living forces, emissaries of the divine mind, and their movements formed a cosmic grammar through which the great work could unfold. The sky was the first manuscript, the zodiac, its sacred alphabet. The signs of Aries to Pisces were not merely seasonal markers, but glyphs of spiritual evolution. Each bore a signature, not just astrologically, but alchemically. Aries, the ram, bore the fire of initiation, the beginning of calcination, the birth of the quest. Taurus anchored energy into matter, mirroring the fixation of spirit. Gemini, dual and mercurial, spoke of separation and polarity, and so on through the wheel until Pisces, the sign of dissolution, reflected the final baptism before rebirth, the coagula after solve. To the Hermetic adepts, planetary energies were the metals of heaven, each of the classical seven: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Moon corresponded not only to a celestial body, but to a metal, a stage of the work, and a psychological function. Saturn was lead, heavy binding, the shadow, the gatekeeper of the work. whose trials begin all transmutation. Jupiter was tin, expansive, visionary, ruling the philosophical breadth needed for spiritual ascent. Mars was iron, the blade that separates, the fire that burns falsehood. The sun gold, the radiant core, the alchemist's goal, the divine self. Venus copper, the harmonizer representing the feminine principle. Love as a binding solvent. Mercury, quicksilver, the messenger, ever-changing, symbol of mind. Trickster and guide, the very spirit of alchemy. The moon, silver, the mirror of hidden light. Intuition, the sacred feminine in her changing veils. But these weren't only poetic associations, they were operative keys. The great work was performed in harmony with the celestial tides. The adept timed his rituals, meditations, and distillations according to planetary hours and lunar phases. Each act aligned with the force above, drawing its energy downward, as above, so below. And through this sacred timekeeping emerged the mystery of the alchemical calendar. More than a tool, it was a talisman, charting the phases of soul work through the rhythms of the stars. The ancient calendars of the Maya, the Sumerians, and the Egyptians were not merely agricultural. They encoded initiatic cycles. The Tzolk'in of the Maya, with its 260-day cycle, mirrored the gestation of transformation, the birth of the stone within. The Dendera zodiac, carved in the ceiling of an Egyptian temple, was not mere decoration. It was a map of cosmic initiation, tracking stellar ages and human fate. Time, to the alchemists, was not linear but spiral. The same events, lessons, and revelations recurred, but each time at a higher turn of the wheel. This spiral nature of time is found in the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its tail, ever circling, ever renewing, not endless repetition, but eternal return with elevation. In this framework, eclipses were not portents of doom, but moments of cosmic reset, when shadow falls upon light and inner truth emerges. Equinoxes and solstices mark the crucibles of the earth, the points of balance and extreme where the veil thinned and the sacred fire could be invoked with greatest potency. The great conjunctions, when Jupiter and Saturn aligned, were seen as moments of transmutation not only in politics or empires, but within the collective soul. Alchemical traditions taught that during these alignments, the astral gate opened more fully, and initiates across the world felt the subtle tremor in the spirit, the call to the next octave of the work. But this was not astrology as we know it today, not fortune-telling or romantic curiosities. It was astral alchemy, the art of aligning the soul with the movements of the divine body. The stars were the organs of the macrocosmic being, and to read them was to hear the whisper of the logos in motion. The secret orders mapped these alignments in silence. Cathedrals and temples were not merely built on sacred ground, they were astronomical instruments. Chartreuse aligns to specific solar phenomena. The pyramids mirror the Orion belt. Stonehenge, a circular altar, marks the sun's rising on the longest day, the resurrection of light. Even the great year, the slow procession of the equinoxes over 25,920 years, was known. Plato spoke of it, the Vedic rishis recorded it, and alchemists understood that each age of Pisces, Aquarius, Leo, Virgo, brought a new tone to the collective great work of humanity. We now stand at a cusp, the transition from Pisces to Aquarius, from faith to knowledge, from veiled wisdom to luminous remembrance. This age, long prophesied, is not the end, but a refining. And the stone, once sought in secrecy, now begins to call from within a new generation. In the next part of our journey, we shall delve into the language of the symbols, the secret alphabet of the alchemists, the sacred diagrams, ciphers, and emblems that concealed and revealed the great work, transmitting its truth across time through silence and sign. Before the world was written in letters, it was inscribed in symbols, primal forms etched into stone, traced in flame, dreamed by sages, the alchemists. like the shamans before them and the mystics beside them, knew that truth to deep for. Speech must be spoken in signs. To read the book of nature, one needed not grammar, but vision, for the symbols of the great work were not inventions of man, but revelations of the cosmos. The alchemical traditions spoke in images, glyphs, emblems, and sigilla, each a condensation of spiritual law into form. These symbols were not static. They were living archetypes, gateways into a deeper reality, and only those with eyes trained to the inner fire could interpret them. Consider the Arboros. The serpent eating its tail. It appears at the beginning of many alchemical texts, often encircling a star, a modula, or a flame. This is no idle metaphor. It is the image of eternal return, the self-consuming fire of transformation. The Arboros is both the cycle of death and rebirth and the nature of the stone itself, that which contains the all, that which becomes itself through its own dissolution. Then there is the rebus, the two-in-one, a crowned androgynous figure, often bearing both a sun and moon, male and female traits, standing atop the world with compass and sword. This is the alchemist's ultimate goal, not a unification that erases, but one that embraces duality, marrying opposites into wholeness. The rebus is the stone in human form, complete, crowned, sovereign over matter and spirit. The seven metals of the ancients each bore their planetary sign. Gold, the sun, perfection, divinity. Silver, the moon, reflection, intuition. Iron, Mars, action, will, severance. Copper, Venus, harmony, love, magnetism. Mercury, transformation, ambiguity, intelligence. Tin, Jupiter, expansion, wisdom, lead, Saturn, inertia, limitation, time. But these metals were not only physical, they were psychological and spiritual forces. To transmute lead into gold was to transmute Saturnine fear into solar radiance. Each glyph was a cipher, a visual spell, resonating with internal energies. The triangle, depending on its orientation, symbolized fire point up, water point down, or the union of spirit and matter when intersected. The square represented earth, structure, the container of form. The circle was eternity, spirit, the perfection that has no edge, and the quintessence, the fifth element, or ether, was shown by the pentagram, the human figure aligned to the cosmos, arms and legs outstretched, the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. These symbols were never random. Each was placed with intention, encoded into manuscripts, carved into stone, hidden in frescoes, and whispered through sigils and secret rites. Among the most mysterious were the alchemical emblems, elaborate drawings that combined multiple symbols into visual parables. In the Rosarium Philosopher, one sees kings and queens merging in sacred union, deathly figures climbing ladders to heaven, lions devouring the sun, birds flying from corpses. These are not images of despair. They are maps of process. They show the mortificatio, the death of the ego, the sublimatio, the rising of spirit, the coagulatio, the return into divine embodiment. The colors themselves held code: black nigredo, putrefaction, the necessary decay. White albedo, purification, the birth of light. Yellow citrinitas, illumination, the golden dawn of the soul. Red rubedo, completion, integration, the stone revealed. Even numbers were sacred. 1 was unity, 2 duality, the beginning of awareness. 3 the triune force, sulfur, salt, and mercury. 4 the elements, earth, air, fire, water. 7 the planets, the metals, the stages. 12 the zodiac, the sacred measure of time. And 13 the number of transformation, death into rebirth. And within the folds of these symbols, the alchemists hid their words in ciphers. Green language, the language of the birds, angelic scripts like Enochian. These were not languages for conversation. They were ritual tools, sonic formulas meant to evoke states of consciousness. The green language in particular, said to be the tongue of nature and the divine, concealed truth within puns, riddles, and paradoxes. One phrase could hold multiple meanings. Solve et coagula, to dissolve and bind, was not only a principle of physical chemistry, but of psychology, of spirit, of life itself. The stone is never gained without first in making. The language of alchemy is, in truth, the language of the soul before speech. It speaks through symbol because only symbol can hold the multivalence of truth. Words are linear. Symbols are holographic, holding entire systems within a single image. That is why the church feared them, why empires outlawed them, why initiates carried them in secret. For to know the symbols was to see the world differently, not as a prison, but as a riddle, not as chaos, but as code. But symbols alone are not enough. They must be activated, breathed into through ritual, embodied through initiation, decoded through lived experience. The stone is not reached by intellect, but by immersion, and thus, in the next stage, we shall follow the rituals themselves, the ancient rites, the sacred fires, the spiritual ceremonies and initiatory trials through which the alchemist became the work, rites still practiced in hidden places and remembered in the bones of ancient temples. There are places where time stops, where light bends, where breath thins, and the air itself tastes of memory. In such places, deep within mountains, beneath ancient ruins, inside forgotten sanctuaries, rituals unfold that do not belong to the surface world. These are the rites of fire, the ceremonies of the stone, where the alchemist does not merely study the work, they become it. But great work is not theory. It is not chemistry or allegory alone. It is ritualized transformation, a deliberate passage through stages of death, rebirth, purification, and integration, each sealed by symbols, movements, sacred objects, and invocations older than writing. Initiation into the mysteries was once the heartbeat of the ancient world. Egypt, Sumer, Chaldea, Greece, India, all bore traditions that concealed the same fundamental truth. Transformation is sacred, and it must be earned through ordeal. In the mystery temples of Egypt, the rite of passage was a descent. The initiate entered the womb of stone, blindfolded, stripped of rank, made to lie in a coffin-shaped sarcophagus in utter darkness. There they remained for 3 days and 3 nights, in the black silence of Nigredo. Death was simulated not for spectacle, but to unbind the soul from the ego's illusion. Some never returned, but those who did emerged resurrected, not merely symbolically, but with a transformed awareness. They had walked to the underworld and returned bearing the flame. These rites later echoed in Eleusis, where initiates drank the kaiken, a sacred brew of barley and visionary herbs, and experienced the descent of Persephone, the weeping of Demeter, and the return from Hades. The ritual was theater, yes, but also mirror. The myth was enacted because it was true, inside the human soul. The seeker experienced themselves as seed, buried, broken, and finally reborn. The Hermetic initiations in Alexandria, the Gnostic rites of the Ophites and Sethians, the Chaldean fire mysteries, all followed the same arc: a descent into the inner chambers, an encounter with one's own shadow, a communion with the higher self or divine twin, and a sealing of the inner stone. But alchemical initiation was always cloaked, not because it was elitist, but because it was dangerous. To call down the powers of dissolution without inner preparation was to risk fragmentation. The work required purification of intent, of emotion, of thought. The body had to become a temple, the will a blade, the heart a vessel. Thus, the rituals were layered with tests. The ritual of the elements was one such rite. The initiate would symbolically pass through earth endurance, water emotion, air clarity, and fire purification. These were not metaphors, but visceral trials: burial, immersion, wine-swept chambers, fire circles. Each element challenged a core aspect of the initiate: stability, surrender, reason, passion. If balance was not achieved, the path ended there. There were alchemical weddings, sacred unions of male and female energies enacted in ritual space. These were not mere romantic rites, but psycho-spiritual fusions, often mirrored by a real inner transformation. In secret Rosicrucian rites, two adepts, one embodying Sol, the other Luna, would enact the Coneientio Oppositorum, binding spirit and matter through sacred speech, anointing, and symbolic marriage. Some rites were solitary. The cave of the Magi, described in esoteric Christian texts, was said to house an inner initiation rite where the adept confronted a being of radiant darkness, a test of whether the initiate could look upon the unknown without fear. Those who succeeded received visions. Those who fled were never seen again. Others were collective. In Druidic circles, initiates would walk the 12-stone path beneath the stars, each stone representing a stage of the great year, the ceremony timed to celestial alignments, the night itself becoming the alchemical vessel. In Hindu Tantra, the inner fire rite, Agnihotra, used fire, mantras, and breath to purify the inner elements and awaken the Kundalini, the coiled serpent of spiritual energy. The rising of this serpent through the chakras was a live reenactment of sublimation, the raw material of the self ascending toward divine union. Ritual objects aided the process. The wand, will in focused form; the chalice, the vessel of receptivity; the blade, the power of separation; the pentacle, the grounding of spirit into matter. These were not props, but tools of inner architecture. Language, too, shifted. Rituals were spoken in sacred tongues, not for secrecy, but for resonance. The syllables themselves carried frequency. The divine names were not recitations, but vibrations, unlocking specific archetypal forces within the soul and the field around it. All of this was governed by timing, as above, so below. Ceremonies were aligned to the waxing and waning moon, to the solstice gates, to eclipses and planetary conjunctions. Time itself was seen as an alchemical ingredient, not a backdrop, but a living force to be harmonized with. But perhaps the most sacred of all rites was the silent rite, when the initiate, stripped of symbols, kneels before the invisible. Breath stilled, senses sharpened. Nothing is said, nothing is shown, yet in that stillness the stone speaks, for the deepest initiations are not given, they are received, in silence, in fire. In light, these rites still live, hidden in mountain temples, in whispered traditions of desert mystics, in lineages that never broke, only turned inward, and in the dreams of seekers who remember, without knowing how, that they have done this before. And now we approach the veil's thinning, the final stages of the journey. In the next part, we shall explore the stone itself, not as symbol or metaphor, but as reality, what it is, where it exists, and why it is the axis of all true alchemy. It has been called many names: lapis philosophorum, the red tincture, the grail, the elixir, the perfect medicine. Yet across all cultures and centuries, across languages dead and forgotten, the stone remains unspeakable, not because it cannot be described, but because it must be experienced. The philosopher's stone is not merely the end of the work, it is the work made flesh, the turning of eternity inward, until spirit and matter sing the same name. To the uninitiated, it is myth; to the world, legend; to the alchemist who has passed through the fire, it is truth embodied. So what, then, is this stone? It is the quintessence, the fifth element, the ether, born not of one element but of the perfect balancing of all four: earth, air, fire, and water. It is conscious matter, radiant and incorruptible, said to heal any illness, transmute any base metal, and bestow an eternal clarity to the one who holds it. Not eternal life as the world thinks it, but eternal awareness, immortality of the soul in full remembrance of its divine origin. In the physical sense, some alchemists, such as Nicholas Flamel, Basil Valentine, and Sendivogius, claim to have touched it. Flamel, the 14th century scribe turned alchemist, recorded in code the transformation of lead to gold after deciphering a mysterious illuminated manuscript, the Book of Abraham the Jew. His tomb was found empty. His home bore symbols of the work. His memory haunts the archives of Paris. Was his stone physical, spiritual, or both? The alchemists were careful. Their descriptions are never direct. The stone is said to be red as blood, yet white as snow. It glows, yet casts no shadow. It can be held in the palm, yet it pervades all things. It is described as a powder, a crystal, a fire, a child, even a divine androgyny. This ambiguity is not to deceive but to guard. The stone reveals itself only to the one who has become it. And so we must turn inward again, for the stone, in its highest form, is an awakened state of being. The ancient texts describe it through paradox. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is known to all, but found by few. It is the beginning and the end. It is the child of the sun and the moon, conceived in darkness, born in light. The alchemist's laboratory was the soul. The fire was suffering, the alembic, the purified heart. The reagents were courage, silence, and the will to see what most flee from. And after years or lifetimes of grinding, burning, dissolving, recombining, something shimmered within. The stone. In this form, it is not touched, it touches. It is not found, it reveals. It is not held, it inhabits. It is the perfected self, but more, it is the self beyond self, the divine image at the center of the labyrinth. It is the axis mundi, the world tree, the spinal path that connects heaven and earth. The stone is the eye that sees in all directions, and in the moment of its revelation, the alchemist becomes the fifth element, no longer bound by polarity, illusion, or time. They walk the world unseen, yet see through all. They are no longer ruled by stars, for they have become one. They are the fixed fire. Yet even here, the work does not end, for the stone is not only the goal of the journey, it is its beginning in another octave. One must now bear the stone, wield its radiance, with humility. The true adept does not flee to caves or palaces. They return to the world quiet, watching, planting seeds. This is why many alchemists vanish, not because they died, but because they transcended name and need. Their legacy lives in symbols, manuscripts, talismans left behind, signs for those who would come after. You will not find them in history books, but they are present in the margins, in the luminous gaps between what is told and what is true. The final alchemical paradox is this: the stone is within you. It always has been, but to touch it, you must forget yourself. To wield it, you must surrender all power. To be it, you must die before you die. And then, from the ashes, something ancient and new will rise. In the final part of our journey, we shall step back, not away, but deeper still, and contemplate what it means to live with the stone. What is the legacy of the alchemist in a world adrift in forgetfulness? What paths remain for the seekers of this age? And how does the stone continue its silent call through our prophecy and the soul's deepest longing? The journey winds to its end, and yet we find ourselves at the beginning again, for such is the path of the alchemist, not a straight road, but a spiral, ever deeper, ever higher. And now, as the veil thins and the dust of forgotten empires stirs, we must ask the question that stands behind all others. What remains? The ancient temples lie in ruin. The rites are fractured. The manuscripts burn quietly in the libraries of collectors who do not know what they hold. The brotherhoods that once whispered under moonlight now vanish into parody or secrecy. And yet, the fire has not gone out. It never will. The philosopher's stone cannot be stolen. It cannot be erased, for it is carried not in books or bloodlines, but in the hearts of those who remember, or begin to remember, the call. It speaks in dreams, in symbols, in sudden moments of stillness when the soul glimpses the mirror behind the world. This age, the age of machines, of distraction, of noise, is not the enemy of the work. It is the next crucible, the new Athener. We are, all of us, immersed in the fire. Systems dissolve, institutions collapse, old orders burn. What is this if not calcination on a planetary scale? The alchemists foresaw this. In secret prophecies and in coded diagrams, they spoke of a time when outer guidance would fade, and the stone must awaken within each soul, a time when the initiatory temples would no longer be built of stone, but of silence, of presence, of inner alignment. This is that time. The legacy of the alchemist, then, is not one of nostalgia, it is invitation. You need not wear robes or decipher ancient glyphs to begin the work. You need only the flame of will, the courage to face the shadow, and the hunger for truth that no distraction can feed. You are the vessel. You are the element. You are the fire and the water, the king and the queen, the child and the serpent. You are the unfinished stone. In art, music, poetry, and architecture, the current still flows. It reveals itself in the geometry of sacred design, in the golden ratios of the great cathedrals, in the structure of Bach's fugues, in the mandalas of distant monks, and the graffiti of urban visionaries. Everywhere, the old language flickers, waiting for someone who can read it. Even in science, that modern inheritor of the alchemical impulse, echoes remain, quantum fields, morphic resonance, the observer's effect on reality. These are the modern tongues of an ancient knowing, that the inner world shapes the outer, and consciousness is the true matter of transmutation. The stone in its purest essence is the embodied memory of wholeness. To live with it is to walk the world as a quiet flame, not to escape the world, but to transform it by presence alone. The true adept does not speak of the work. They are the work. They move unseen yet luminous. They blush without touch. They gaze, and things shift. They hold the axis still in a world that spins too fast. And when they are gone, something remains, a resonance, a slight bend in time, a moment of silence that lingers. And perhaps now it is your turn. For if you have followed this path, word by word, image by image, silence by silence, then you have already stepped beyond the veil. The flame has already stirred within, and the stone, perhaps, no longer seems so distant. It waits, not at the end of some secret passage, but within the moment you choose to begin, to see, to listen, to burn, to transform. Thus the journey ends. Thus the great work begins. Finis et initium. The end is the beginning. The circle is unbroken. The stone lives.